My name is Perry, and welcome to the Literary Knitterary. Okay, so we're going to pretend that I said 12 videos in 12 days instead of one video every day, and just move on. In this video, we'll be talking about books 11 and 12 of the Odyssey, meaning we have hit the halfway point. And in these two books, Odysseus concludes his narrative of what happened to him between leaving Troy and arriving on the island of Calypso, bringing us full circle to essentially where the narrative began. So in book 11, following Circe's instructions, Odysseus and his crew sail to the land of the Cimmerians, which is a land of constant darkness at the end of the world. Odysseus digs a trench and pours libations into it, and then slaughters an animal, sacrifices an animal, and pours the blood into the trench, and then up come all of these ghosts. First, Odysseus talks to the spirit of one of his own men named Elpenor, who actually died back on Circe's island before they left. He was drunk and he was up on the roof, so he basically was trying to get off of the roof and fell off of it. And so he beseeches Odysseus to give him a proper burial when they get back to Circe's island. There's a lot that's interesting here if you study burial customs or conceptions of death in the ancient world. Next, he talks to the prophet Tiresias, who you might recognize from the Theban play cycle. And Tiresias basically says, I know you've already been through a lot, but it looks to me like you have even more trouble coming. He warns Odysseus to leave the cattle of the sun god Helios alone, or else he will come home late and exhausted in a stranger's boat, having destroyed his men. And then he goes on to talk about the additional penance to Poseidon that Odysseus will have to carry out after he makes it home, which I described in a previous episode, where basically he has to take an oar far enough inland that people don't recognize it for what it is anymore because they have no knowledge of the sea, and then he has to plant the oar in the ground. So he's basically like spreading the word of Poseidon to people who wouldn't have heard of him. After that, he talks to his mother, Anticlea, who gives him news of how things are going at home, including the fact that, as far as she knows, Penelope has stayed constant to Odysseus, and also the fact that she herself died of grief waiting for her son to return. Then there's a pretty long passage where Odysseus describes seeing a catalog of different, mythical women, the brides and daughters of other more famous mythical men. Then he describes his conversation with Agamemnon, who warns him about the dangers of a deceitful or unfaithful wife. For obvious reasons, this is something Agamemnon himself is concerned with. And then he talks to Achilles, and these lines are frequently cited because Achilles says, Odysseus, you must not comfort me for death. I would prefer to be a workman hired by a poor man on a peasant farm than rule as king of all the dead. This is telling about Greek attitudes towards death in general, but also is especially significant because in Achilles' own story, he has the choice to make between a short life full of military glory or a long life of obscurity, and of course he chooses glory. But when we see him again in the Odyssey, it seems perhaps that he wishes he had made a different choice. Odysseus then sees Ajax, who won't talk to him because he's still mad that after Achilles died, Odysseus was awarded Achilles' armor in Ajax's stead, and Ajax killed himself over this perceived dishonor. And then basically Odysseus gets a little bit nervous, and so he decides to leave. In book 12, they go back to Circe's house, they bury Elpenor, and then Circe gives Odysseus more instructions about the dangers he is about to face, the Sirens, and then a choice between either the Wandering Rocks or facing Scylla and Charybdis. They embark. As they get close to the Sirens, Odysseus fills the ears of his crew members with wax and has them bind him to the mast of his ship so that he can't get away, and he instructs them that if he begs them to let him go, to untie him, they should just tie him tighter. The Sirens promise Odysseus a beautiful song that will increase his knowledge, but the plans he set in place work and they make it through unscathed. They then pass between Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is a giant six-headed sea monster who perches up high on a cliff and swoops down with all of her heads to pluck sailors off of ships, and Charybdis is a giant whirlpool that sucks apparently all of the water in the surrounding area down into its depths and then spurts it back out again 3 times a day. They lose 6 men, but they make it through, and they make it to the island of the god of the sun, Helios. Now Odysseus is like, I have been warned about this island and I don't think we should stop. But his men protest, led by one of them named Eurylochus, and basically because he's outnumbered, Odysseus concedes to them. Of course, as soon as they dock on the island, they're basically becalmed. There are no favorable winds blowing, and so they stay there until they run out of supplies, and then as they continue to get hungrier and hungrier, the men decide that maybe it wouldn't be so bad to kill some of these forbidden cattle after all. Odysseus goes off to pray and says that the gods make him fall asleep, and when he comes back, he finds his men eating the cattle of the sun. Helios gets super mad and makes Zeus promise to take revenge on them. So when there finally is some wind blowing and they get on their ship, there is a terrible shipwreck. All of the men except Odysseus die, and Odysseus basically clings to wreckage of his ship and is borne backwards on on a southward wind back through the passage of Scylla and Charybdis, where his little piece of wreckage is sucked down into the whirlpool and he has to hang from a little fig tree growing on a rock until it's basically spit back out and he can grab onto it and row away, paddle away. From there, he drifts on his piece of wreckage for a period of 10 days until he washes up on the shore of Calypso's island, bringing us full circle. So in effect, you've got two different kinds of journeys presented in these two books, one of which is usually studied as if it is a literal journey to the underworld, and the other of which is a more traditional journey on the ocean. When they arrive back at Circe's island, she says, "This is amazing. You all went alive to Hades. You will be twice dead when other people only die one time." There are a few other characters in Greek mythology who make a journey to the underworld before they die. Heracles is a notable example. He goes down twice, once to steal Cerberus and once to rescue Alcestis. Other than that, the only other example I can think of off the top of my head is Orpheus, whose journey obviously had, mixed results. But this literary tradition of a journey to the underworld, an exploration of the afterlife as a physical place, persists in the canon in everything from the Aeneid to Dante's Inferno to arguably the Good Place. This also creates an interesting dynamic because when Calypso offers to make Odysseus immortal so that he can stay with her forever and effectively become a god, and he turns her down, he is making an informed decision, which is rare for these kinds of bargains. He's already seen what death is like, which again, in the ancient Greek imagination, being dead is not a fun time. Odysseus chooses his home alongside his wife and his son, but also alongside his inevitable death over immortality in a strange land. So also at this point in the story, we have basically had three prophecies about the way that Odysseus will finally make it home. First, we have Polyphemus asking his father Poseidon to punish Odysseus. He says, "Grant that Odysseus the city sacker will never go back home. Or if it is fated that he will see his family, then let him get there late and with no honor, in pain and lacking ships, and having caused the death of all his men, and let him find more trouble in his own house." So that's Polyphemus' wish, that he doesn't get home at all, or that if he does get home, it's after a long time, with no men and no ships, and arriving to a troubled household. Later, Tiresias says much the same thing about Odysseus' eventual return home, but for different reasons. Referring to the cattle of the sun god, he says, "If you leave them be, keeping your mind fixed on your journey home, you may still get to Ithaca despite great losses. But if you hurt those cows, I see disaster for your ship and for your men. If you yourself escape, you will come home late and exhausted in a stranger's boat, having destroyed your men. And you will find invaders eating your supplies at home, courting your wife with gifts." So basically, for a different reason, Tiresias presents the exact same set of circumstances surrounding Odysseus' return home. Late, no men, no ships, trouble at home. Then finally, Circe echoes this sentiment again, saying, "If you damage them, the cows, I must foretell disaster for your ship and for your crew. Even if you survive, you will return late and humiliated, having caused the death of all your men." Late, no honor, no men. This opens up questions about how much the events of Odysseus' journey are down to fate, or to the will of the gods, or to the decisions that Odysseus himself makes. Polyphemus seems to think that even his father, a god, can only delay but not actually change Odysseus' fate if he is eventually fated to get home. Tiresias and Circe both make it seem like he has a chance to avoid complete disaster if he can just keep from slaughtering the cattle of the sun. And it is Odysseus' original intention to avoid that island entirely. But at least as he himself explains it, he has to go to that island in order to avoid a mutiny, and then it is the gods himself who cause him to fall asleep while the men are slaughtering the cattle of the sun. Now, of course, this is Odysseus still telling his own story from his own perspective, so he could be tweaking things slightly to make himself seem less at fault.
Alright, this turned out to be a bit of an awkward transition, so I'm trying to fix it in editing. It is certainly possible that Odysseus is tweaking the truth to try to present a version of the story where his culpability is minimized. That is one possibility. But really, we don't know to what extent Odysseus or even the gods themselves can change the outcome, the ending. It could be that all of them are constrained in some sense by fate itself. Next, I'm going to be talking about the values that the World of the Odyssey prizes, by which I mean those qualities that it rewards with survival.
And it certainly seems to take a different kind of hero to be successful in the world of the Odyssey than it does in, say, the world of the Iliad. Achilles made the choice to sacrifice everything for honor and glory, but in the Odyssey we see him as a shade in the underworld, clearly regretting that choice and yearning for life. When Circe is describing the dangers that await Odysseus on the next leg of his journey, he asks her if he can possibly fight Scylla, and she says, "No, you fool. Your mind is still obsessed with deeds of war, but now you must surrender to the gods." On a similar theme, in the introduction, Wilson discusses the decision Odysseus's men make to slaughter the cattle of the sun rather than waiting to die of hunger. She says, "The episode hints at an important idea in the poem, that the willingness to die for honor, which is valued so highly on the battlefield, is not always useful in these strange new worlds. Military valor in the world of the Odyssey risks looking too much like impatience. The poem shows us the reward that comes to the much-enduring or long-suffering protagonist through his willingness to wait for the right moment to act without ever giving up the goal." I believe that is it for today. If you have any thoughts about literary trips to the underworld or the different values in the Iliad versus the Odyssey, I would love to hear them. Or if that sounds too complicated but you still want to let me know that you were here, you can leave me an emoji in the comments down below. If you liked this video, I do hope you will consider subscribing, and I will see you again soon. But in the meantime, I hope that everyone is staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I hope that somewhere out there there's a great book waiting just for you. Bye!